Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So what I'll try to do in the next 20 minutes is address the issues of meningococcal vaccination in KSA as it relates to the Hajj and pilgrimages and Umrah, which is going to be expanding over the next year or two. So meningococcal meningitis has a worldwide distribution. Of course, we have sporadic and clusters or large epidemics that happens usually in Africa. There are 13 serogroups, of which 6 are important and responsible for most of the meningococcal cases that we see. And the distribution of the serotypes are different based on the regions across the globe. But when you look at Africa, Africa has almost 80% of the burden of meningococcal disease. The transmission is strictly human disease. There's direct transmission from person to person. You have to have a very close and prolonged contact, and you will see from the photos from the Hajj and Umrah that people can be actually in very, very close proximity to each other with having viral illnesses, coughing and sneezing and transmitting large droplets. The average incubation period is 4 days, and it ranges between 2 to 10 days. It's usually carried in the pharynx and basically can overwhelm the defense system and cause bacteremia and meningitis. The 1 to 10% asymptomatic carriers and up to 20 to 25% during epidemics. Neisseria meningitis produce rapidly progressive disease. Basically, it's a medical emergency. Occurs in meningitis happens in 50 to 60% of the cases, and then more severe disease with meningococcemia happens in 5 to 20%. The fatality rate can be as high as 20%. In KSA, the fatality is actually around 15%. 10 to 15% of the cases develop neurologic sequelae. And of course, the risk of meningococcal disease increase in children younger than 1 year of age, between 15 to 19 years old, in crowded living conditions, and also people who are participating in Umrah and Hajj. Now, we do know that from data on transmission of meningococcal disease that Neisseria meningitis is actually transmitted through direct contact, and you have to have large or medium droplet aerosol, but it's not transmitted through aerosol or airborne transmission. This is in contrast to influenza and adenoviruses, which are actually transmitted through airborne route. Of course, when you have crowded conditions, you can increase the risk of having outbreaks, and that's why we always worry every year in the Hajj and Umrah about the transmission of meningococcal disease, especially because the carriage at sometimes can be extremely high, up to 20% during those times. Of course, the risk factors for disease, if you don't have bactericidal antibodies, or because you have some immune deficiencies, either because of low complement or complement deficiency, or hypogammaglobulinemia, or if you have underlying immune dysfunction. Also, the change in the organism has a big impact on the incidence of meningococcal disease, and changing the serotype is also a huge concern. And of course, if you have a concurrent respiratory infection with influenza, chlamydia, or other viral pathogen, you are more prone to actually have meningococcal meningitis. And I don't need to tell you that during the Hajj, we've just done recently a meta-analysis and a systematic review of all the reports on viral illnesses during the Hajj. Almost 80% of people attending the Hajj will have the Hajj cough, which is actually a viral etiology. And if you look at the results of the studies based on PCR, you can find that rhinovirus is the most common, followed by all the different influenza viruses. And if you look at studies looking at cultures, you can see influenza overall is by far the most common pathogen. So these viruses are extremely common during the Hajj time, which makes the possibility of having meningococcal outbreaks very high. And of course, because of the crowdness and difficulties in quarantining individuals and contact tracing, it makes it a very complex issue. Again, this diagram just shows you that people at Hajj and Umrah, or any mass gathering for that matter, seem to have an increased risk of developing meningococcal meningitis. So Hajj, of course, most of you know, it's once in a lifetime obligation. We get pilgrims from 187 countries across the globe. Currently, we're getting 2 million from outside and 2 million from within the country. The plan with the 2030 vision is to go to almost 6 million pilgrims from outside in 2030. We also have the Ministry of Interior has done a lot in trying to restrict domestic pilgrims from going without permit. And if you get a permit, it will be in the system, in the computer system of the Ministry of Interior. You will not be eligible to get a second permit until 5 years passes. And I think the governor of Mecca has been very, very strict in forbidding people from going to the Hajj without permission. And actually, if you do go to the Hajj without permission, you will be taken out of the Hajj while you're there, and then it can be deported if you are not a local citizen. And if you're a citizen, you'll be actually put in prison and pay a huge fine. So basically, the challenges are huge. This is how crowded it can get during the Hajj. This is in Ramadan, so we'll be seeing this in the next few weeks, inshallah. And this picture of the mosque is, of course, before the King Abdullah expansion. Now, when you look at the number of Muslims across the globe, there are 1.3 billion followers. There are Muslim communities in more than 140 countries. There is 15.2 Muslim resides in the EU, which is 4%. And the government tries its best to accommodate as many Muslims every year to perform the Hajj, and that's why the Vision 2030 is actually promoting the expansion of the Umrah and Hajj. Last year we had 5.5 million people for the Umrah. This year already, until today, I think we have 6.2 million people, and the numbers probably will get to 8 or 9 million by the time of the Hajj. And then over the next few years, I think the plan is to get to 30 million Umrah every year. These are the numbers of pilgrims from within the country and from outside, and you can see that over the last 4 years the numbers have been reduced, and the reason is because of the King Abdullah expansion project, and that's almost completed now. So hopefully the Grand Mosque will take at least triple the amount of people that used to be able to take in the past. Of course, we have pilgrims from many countries, and the most populated Muslim countries will have the most visas, and those are the ones that constitute the majority of the pilgrims that come to KSA. So if you look at the top 10, top 5 countries, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Turkey, and Iran are the countries that send most pilgrims to us for the Hajj. Of course, the list of the Umrah pilgrims in the top 10 is different than what it is for the Hajj. So Egypt is number 1 when it comes to the Umrah season, and actually other countries that are not in the top 10 makes it in the top 10 for the Umrah, like Algeria and Jordan and other countries become in the top 10 countries for the Umrah, but not for the Hajj. Again, pictures of the crowd. So why do we think that there is an increased risk of meningococcal disease or airborne disease during the Hajj? That's because people come here and stay for 2 weeks. The humidity and heat helps to sort of transmit pathogens. Overcrowding. Some of the tents in Mina can actually take 100 or 200 people. So people lie next to each other like sardines, and then when they turn, you can actually cough and sneeze in front of the other person's face. Of course, most of the people that come to the Hajj are elderly. They're more than 60 years of age. And of course, they do the ritual of the Hajj, which is very exhausting and decrease the immunity of the individuals. So the history of the outbreaks of meningococcal disease over the years in Saudi Arabia, the first large outbreak was in 1987, and it was caused by serogroup A. And I'm sure most of you know the famous report that was published in JAMA, where there was some intercontinental spread of the disease, and people who had attended the Hajj went back to the US and other countries and transmitted the meningococcal serogroup A. That's why we feel that trying to address the meningococcal disease is critical, because it actually affects the global health security on a global level. There was a smaller outbreak that happened in 1992 and 1993, again with mainly serogroup A among the non-vaccinated. And as you know, since 1987, there's a requirement for the Hajj to have the bivalent vaccine A and C. And then in 2000, we had a large outbreak of W135, which basically made us mandate the quadrivalent meningococcal vaccine in 2000, hoping that it will prevent another outbreak in 2001, which unfortunately did not happen. And we had 2 large outbreaks in 2000 and 2001 with the same serotype of W135. So this is the 2000-2001 outbreak. You can see that it was 2 large outbreaks, and then since the application of the quadrivalent meningococcal vaccine, the numbers of cases have decreased gradually over the years, and we hardly see any more cases in the last few years with this application. The compliance has been extremely good with the quadrivalent vaccine, almost 97 or 98% compliance with the vaccination, and I'll show you some of the data. So this is some pictures from Mina. You can see how people can be in a very crowded situation, and if anybody is coughing or sneezing, they'll be in close contact with others. Now, luckily during the Hajj, we do have some dormant hospitals that are opened only or commissioned only during the Hajj time. These have almost 500 ICU beds, and they are basically state-of-the-art ICU beds with monitors and invasive devices. So basically the management of pilgrims during the Hajj is done at the highest level. The outbreak in 2000, basically we had 253 cases of meningococcal disease in KSA. 93 cases were confirmed to have been caused by W135. There were 60 cases confirmed to have been caused by meninge A. And as of August 2000 in that year, there were a total of 400 meninge cases of W135 among the pilgrims. And unfortunately, some of these individuals went back to their countries, and they caused cases in 16 countries outside of Saudi Arabia. So you can see the impact of meningococcal disease is extremely high, and the government of KSA takes it very seriously in applying the recommendations for meningococcal disease. This is a 2000 outbreak, and you can see that if you look at the serogroups, there was a mix of the purple, which is W135, group A, serogroup A, which is in yellow, and serogroup B and C, which is in light, I don't know what you call it, violet or light purple, and then some unknown serogroups. And again, we show you the distribution of the serotypes. So basically it was a mix of serogroup A and W135. Of course, further work was done by our colleague, the CDC, to look at the strain and where it came from, and on doing genotyping and detailed analysis, it was found that the 2000 outbreak strain is related to strains from Africa, mainly from Mali, Algeria, and Gambia, that were stored samples from the 1990s. As I said, attempt by the local health authorities in KSA to secure enough quadrivalent vaccine for 2000 failed, and then in 2001 we were able to recommend prophylaxis with ciprofloxacin, people coming to us from the Indian subcontinent, as a measure to prevent further cases. Why do we use chemoprophylaxis recommendation for people coming from the Indian subcontinent? Because we did have some carriage data, and if you look at the carriage data from different countries, this is on arrival. You can see that people coming to us from Bangladesh and India had the highest carriage rate compared to other countries, and that's why during that season the recommendation was actually to add ciprofloxacin decolonization for these pilgrims. Unfortunately, as I said, these measures did not prevent another outbreak in 2001, and there were 109 new cases of meningitis occurring among pilgrims, with 35 deaths. More than 50% of these cases were again confirmed to be W135. Unfortunately, because some of the pilgrims went back to their cities in KSA, we had a large outbreak of W135 in KSA among returning Hajis and their families, and it was mainly in children. So this was discussed heavily in the National Immunization Committee at that time, and decision was made that nobody will be allowed to come to the Hajj in the future years without evidence of quadrivalent meningococcal vaccine. Now, most of the people who go to the Hajj, if they're going from KSA, they will not be issued a permit unless they show evidence of influenza vaccine and meningococcal vaccine. People coming from international, they'll be seen at the 11 ports, land ports of entry, and also 2 seaports and 2 airports by the public health officers working for the Ministry of Health, and only people who have certificates will be allowed to enter for the Hajj. People who do not have certificates for meningococcal vaccine are actually given ciprofloxacin to decolonize them. Following the application of the recommendation at that time, there were no cases in 2002 and 2003. and it seems like the quadrivalent meningococcal vaccine was actually protective. The recommendation continues to be to give the quadrivalent meningococcal vaccine for all pilgrims and local residents in Mecca and Medina, and also to recommend it for all healthcare workers and military staff who work in Mecca and Medina during the Hajj season. Chemoprophylaxis is only given for pilgrims coming from the African meningitis belt, and the prophylaxis for leaving the Hajj premises was actually discontinued. I'm not going to bother you with the difference between conjugate and polysaccharide, but we know that the polysaccharide vaccine is no longer available, and now the move is to go to the conjugate vaccine. When you look at the requirements by the Ministry of Health, it does not actually state conjugate or polysaccharide. It leaves it up to the country to decide which vaccine they can procure and give to their pilgrims. When it comes to chemoprophylaxis from the African belt, you can see that the compliance actually is extremely good. We give almost 500,000 doses of ciprofloxacin coming from the meningitis belt. The compliance among the people working in the Hajj premises, healthcare workers from within KSA and from outside, is actually quite good, almost 85 or 86%. But I think more work is needed to increase the compliance of people working in the Hajj premises in Mecca and Medina from the locals. So these are the current requirements for the Hajj: the quadrivalent meningococcal vaccine for all the pilgrims and children from age 2 and pregnant women. And of course, yellow fever vaccine is required for pilgrims coming from endemic countries, and polio vaccine to countries which are having outbreaks or have endemic disease. And then the recommendation is to have seasonal flu vaccine and pneumococcal vaccine. And again, this was just recently released for 2018 pilgrimage requirements. Now, this is partly halfway through the expansion, and when I talk about the expansion, I meant all these buildings and towers around the Grand Mosque have been demolished, and their owners have been compensated, and now the Grand Mosque has gone all the way into that space. So hopefully this will make it much easier for the pilgrims in the future, inshallah, to perform the Hajj with ease. Many advances in the Hajj every year. Last year they trialed the electronic bracelet. This is a new technology where people can have their identity details, including their contacts and phone numbers. And this is in response to the stampede that happened in 2016, where people could not be identified. When the stampede happened, some of the people were not identified because of the facial injuries. So now these bracelets hopefully will be applied, and people will be identified through the bracelet, and they can be easily communicated with their families. So conclusion and take-home message: the spread of infectious disease at Hajj within a short space of time might be expected to compromise the health system of the host country. Additionally, meningococcal disease poses a threat to the global health community, and that's why the Ministry of Health and KSA takes it very seriously and works very closely with public health partners in WHO, Public Health England, CDC, and European CDC. Vaccination compliance are important strategies to reduce the risk of transmission of chemical disease. Unfortunately, the compliance with the meningococcal vaccination has been extremely good over the last few years. In the operation and management of Hajj, there are several sectors who are involved, and it's basically a teamwork which basically lead to a very successful Hajj season every year. Hajj, of course, poses complex challenges that require broad expertise and multidisciplinary collective approach. Meningococcal disease should always be high priority disease during the Hajj, and focus on new emerging subtypes is a must. Now that we have covered both the A, C, W, and W135, recent data that we have published in Vaccine just in December 2017, where we collected data from 2 years in the Hajj, shows that we're seeing much more B than the other subtypes. So I think the next outbreak, God forbid, that will happen during the Hajj will be either serotype B or X. So basically we need to be very cautious and collect samples and be able to see what's going on. Thank you very much for your attention.